Why is changing people so hard? You reason with them, you ask them to do something for you, and often they make some excuse. And you might push a little harder, and you find they push back. You push even harder perhaps, and then they dig their heels in. Have you ever found yourself in this situation? It's so frustrating. Well, maybe the problem is that we shouldn't be trying to change people at all. Maybe there is another way. Let me tell you about Ian. Some years ago, I joined a new organisation. I was introduced to a senior manager called Ian, not his real name. He headed another department and it was part of my role to serve him. Well, Ian made it clear that he wanted as little to do with me as possible. At best, he treated me as if I was irrelevant. At worst, he treated me like I was an adversary. I found his stance towards me so frustrating. Every idea I suggested was greeted with open disdain or indifference. I had a strategy, and yet he seemed to want to block it at every turn. It seemed that every time, even before I had finished speaking, he had an objection. Whatever I said, it seemed he would disagree with me. He came over as so contrarian. Have you ever had a relationship like that? What could I do about this? What would you do? Well, this is what I did. First, I checked my attitude towards Ian. I reflected on what I thought of him, and what I found was not positive. I realized that a significant part of the problem was what I brought to our meetings. I was defensive to the point of being argumentative. Ian saw this. I realized I needed to take myself in hand. Secondly, I chose to like him. It sounds a little silly or contrived to say this, I know, but most of us think we either like someone or we don't. But I chose to like Ian. I made it my business to like him, and I discovered that there was quite a bit to admire in him. It is amazing what you find when you start to look for something. Then my liking for him became quite natural. I had begun to separate him from his actions. The next most important thing I did was I listened to him. Part of my problem was that all our conversations up to that point had been about my wants, my ideas, my agenda. I deliberately stopped doing that. I started to listen to him, to his needs, his concerns, his dreams. I studied him. Now, I admit it was quite a struggle to do this, as listening seemed to build in yet more delay to my plans. It seemed to push progress back even further. However, as he found me truly listening, he began to open up to me more, to trust me more. And then I began to find ways that I could help him, but only after I began to listen. He shared his priorities with me, then his plans and his passions. And I began to help him in ways that I didn't have to. For example, once when I had a visitor from Hong Kong, knowing Ian's interest in that city and culture, I invited Ian along to meet him as well. He became grateful towards me. He invited me into his meetings and sessions to ask my advice. He was still a little wary of me, but was much more open. Now, this didn't mean that I simply became weak and compliant, but I began to value him for who he was. Later, when I earned his trust, Ian shared with me that he had found me rather threatening at first, that I came over as a know-it-all, as having it all together, and wanting to squeeze him into my own mould. So of course he resisted me. If the roles had been reversed, I'm sure I would have done the same. Now we were working on the same challenges together. We were no longer adversaries, but co-workers, working shoulder to shoulder on common problems, and we enjoyed it. We didn't agree on everything, but that fed our mutual respect for each other. He even helped me hone my strategy so that it became even better. He now had a sense of co-owning what I was doing. Our relationship was in such good stock that by the time I left that organisation 4 years later, he honoured me at my farewell party. We are still friends to this day. Why change really fails? There is a common unstated belief that if only we had more resources, better tools, better equipment, a better plan, then change would be easy. For a while as a project manager, I believed this. Not anymore. Technology and systems don't give you good change. People do. The failure rate of technology projects is in fact quite high. The Standish Group's Chaos Report found that only 29% of IT project implementations are successful, and 19% are considered utter failures. And if we examine the cause of project failure, people and communications are among the top 5 reasons. Here's a key point. The real surprise for many of us is that most change initiatives, most projects fail because of people, not because of some design or systems failure, some fault in the technology or equipment. Failures in projects, in major changes, and afterwards the disappointing benefits from big investments in change. All of these are not caused primarily by technical issues, but because of the people, and because of the conflict or misunderstanding between people. Now, you may be asking yourself, what has this got to do with me? I'm not a project manager. Well, what I discovered were some keys that turn out to be valuable to all of us whenever we seek to influence those around us for the better. We may have nothing to do with formal projects or business. We're just trying to influence others around us to improve things. Well, what I can share with you will help you a great deal. It's almost like there are some laws of human nature that I've discovered. Consider for a moment all of the changes that we try to make that involve the cooperation of other people. And this is not just about large corporates or complex software projects. From my recent experience, this also relates to trying to move house, to influencing other family members, and working in various voluntary groups for the good of our community. Whether we realize it or not, we are all attempting to lead change, big or small, public or private, and most of us are very bad at it. So back to the title of this video. Why is changing people so hard? It's hard because we shouldn't be doing it. To try to change someone tempts us to manipulate or control them. It means we are treating other human beings as, at best, some sort of cog in the machine, as a means to an end, at worst as an obstacle or as an enemy, and they are probably not. As Danny Silk says, you cannot control other people, you can only control yourself. Now, that's an uncomfortable truth, but once we embrace it, we begin to work with people effectively. And then there's the matter of overload. When we're overloaded with a huge task list and so little time to get through it all, it's tempting to treat other people's compliance as simply another task. The urgent shifts us from being open to conversation and negotiation to being task-focused. We want their yes and their resulting action as quickly as possible so that we can get on with the next task in our list. We feel we don't have time for all this people stuff. We're far too busy for it. Just agree with me and do it, and we can move on. And in the process, relationships get damaged. I know, I've done it. But here's a strange paradox. If we hold our nerve and approach people with patience, engaging them and influencing them in the right way, in the long run, it saves us time. However, if we continue to treat people as obstacles or as resources, I avoid the language of human resources, by the way, very quickly we find ourselves in some protracted struggle with them, encountering even greater resistance. It's draining, it's time-consuming, and almost always it's unnecessary. So, here are some mistakes that I see quite a lot. When a leader encounters resistance, they push even harder. The resistance, as we've seen, can just increase. People just dig their heels in and fight even harder. Pushing harder is not the answer. Another is that when there are several people involved or several parties, we're inclined to label them, some of them as winners and some as losers, in the belief that some will always lose out in any complex change. As my story with Ian illustrates, it's possible to work in creative ways where everyone gains something and sometimes everyone wins. In fact, more often than we realize. Another mistake is to see difficult people as the problem. As soon as I label someone as difficult, that label becomes the real obstacle. So ask yourself these questions. What if they, the so-called difficult people, are right? They might hold the solution to this. And what if it is not about control? And what if there is a better way? A way that once we discover and practice it, we begin to see our influence spread and increase. How would it feel to be known as someone who is skillful in making good change happen well and happen fast, even as someone whom people love to work with? And what if this is the way to lead personal change, family change, as well as major transformations in business in our cities and nations? So here's a change challenge for you. Let's imagine that you have been diagnosed with a life-threatening disease. However, your disease could be reversed if only you change your behavior, your lifestyle. You are going to die if you don't change permanently. Would you make that change? Would you? If you said you would, you're probably wrong. The evidence is clear. 9 out of 10 people revert back to old behaviors after only 6 weeks. And yet, one man helped nearly 200 diseased people change for good permanently and recover full, healthy and active lives. How did he do this? Well, in our next video, 3 Keys to Transformation, we'll look at this remarkable case study. In the meantime, you might want to check out my free ebook in the link below, Dealing with Difficult Relationships, which goes into this in more detail.